Hello, my name is Hertling, and I'm a soldier, and you probably can tell. I have been in the military for 38 years. I'm thinking of making it a career. I have seen and studied and analyzed all types of security threats. I've fought in several wars, but there's an emerging threat that we're seeing, and I'd like to talk a little bit about today, that I think will have an effect on our future, our economy, our youth, and our economic system. And it is an emerging threat that concerns me significantly, and it's represented in this picture. Now you might think, why is a soldier talking about a young man who is obviously inactive and perhaps is a little bit overweight? And it's because of some things I've seen in the last several years, and I'd like to talk a little bit about those today and relate it to how I believe it could be a national security threat within the next 20 to 30 years. First of all, in 1983, the Army sent me on something called a broadening experience. I was asked to go to graduate school at Indiana University. I had studied as an undergraduate international relations, but they said, hey, we want you to go and get a master's degree in exercise physiology and then teach PE at West Point. So I said, okay, it sounds like a great idea. It's broadening, to be sure. And I went out there. I went to Indiana University, and my first class was an anatomy class, and I had an anatomy lab. I walked into the classroom, and they issued me a cadaver, as they did everyone else in the class. And the cadaver I had came with a medical history. You know, the professor told us, hey, in order to respect the people who have given their bodies to science, we'd ask you to respect them too, and you perhaps want to name them to remind yourself that they were once a person, although we don't want to give you their real name. So I named mine Charlie. Charlie had a medical history. He had been a 2-pack-a-day smoker. Charlie had not exercised in the last 20 years. Charlie was extremely overweight, and Charlie had died of a cardiovascular disease, and he was 46 years old. When we pulled him up and we began, the various students in the room began our dissection of these bodies, I had a lot tougher time than some of the other students because I had to cut through several layers of adipose. When I got to the internal body cavities, it was amazing to me comparing Charlie's organs to some of the organs of the other students in the class. The heart was surrounded by fat, several inches. One of the tricks our instructors taught us was, we had to go through these labs where you had to name what vein was which and what artery was which, and the professor said, hey, if you pull on an artery, it's like a rubber band. If you pull on a vein, it's like a guitar string and it'll twang. Well, when I pulled on Charlie's arteries and veins, they broke off into my hand. So, I finished grad school, went to teach at West Point for 3 years, from 83 to 86. And then after that assignment, I went back to the operational Army and did things that all soldiers do. Commanded organizations, trained, went to combat several times. And then, coming out of combat as a division commander in 2009, the Army decided they wanted to promote me to 3-star general, I think because they wanted to prove that they have a sense of humor. And then they then sent me to be the commander of initial military training. My job was to train the 160,000 or so soldiers, or correction, civilians that would come into the Army every year and turn them into soldiers. What I found when I reported to that assignment disturbed me. Several facts came to my attention. First of all, 75% or more, a little bit more actually, of the civilians who wanted to join the Army were not qualified to do so. 75% of the 17 to 24-year-olds that wanted to join the Army were not qualified, and the number one reason was because they were obese. Of the 25% that could join the Army, what we found on the first day of basic training was that about 60% of them could not pass the PT test that we gave on the first day. And that was 1 minute of push-ups, 1 minute of sit-ups, and a 1-mile run. Now that's not a difficult test, but we were finding the great majority of our new soldiers coming off the civilian environment could not pass that test. I couldn't understand what had happened. This was not what I had left studying physical education in 1986. As we did some analysis, I realized that a couple of things had changed. First of all, number one, and the primary reason, was starting in the late 90s, the majority of our elementary and high schools stopped teaching PE. And in fact, only 5 states of the 50 in our country right now have mandatory requirements for physical education between K and 12th grade today. 5 out of 50. Now, you say, okay, well that's interesting, but what does the Army care about that? Well, we were getting the product of that, but in addition, the second and third order effects were young people that were joining our service could not run, dodge, jump, tumble, roll, the kinds of things you expect soldiers to do if they're in combat. The second thing we found, or that I found or realized, was that our diet had changed radically in the last 15 years. We were supersizing everything. Having been stationed overseas in Germany, that's not the case there, but they were supersized. If you wanted large fries, you could get extra large and extra, extra large. You couldn't just get a 16-ounce drink, you could get a 24, 42, 64-ounce soda. And that was having a deleterious effect. It was fascinating to me that we were also seeing, scientists told me, that in the last 15 years, from the time I left West Point until today, Americans eat about 30% more calories a day than they had in 1983, and about 15 pounds more of sugar a year. Phenomenal statistics. But the combination of a lack of physical education and increase of poor nutrition was causing secondary effects. This is the O food group, by the way. Okay, and I started calling it the O food group because anything that ends in O is probably not good for you. So we had, I haven't found anything that ended in O yet that was actually very nutritious in nature. But what we started to do was we saw some second and third order effects, and this is one of them. This is at one of our training bases, and we have 5 in the United States Army. We were seeing a malady called femoral neck stress injury. And what that means is the tip of the pelvis would crack. And it wouldn't be a clean break, but it would be a stress fracture that would cause significant problems. And you can see, starting in 2000, that we were beginning to see this, and this is because the people we were recruiting were just coming of age, and many of them had not had the PE, and they had started to have the bad nutrition. But by 2009, when our new recruits were 18 or 19 years old, they had gone through their entire life without having a PE class and dependent on bad nutrition. Those 135 that we had at one training base are significant injuries because in order to fix it, it cost anywhere between $100,000 and $300,000. So this is an economic issue. This isn't just a soldier health issue. For me, this was an economic issue. The third reason, and I'll say this and then move quickly on, the third reason we saw was an increase in technology. Now, I'm a big fan of technology, but the researchers have told me that we now watch as a nation about 150 hours of television a month. That's 5 hours a day. In 2009, when we started this study, we were seeing anywhere from 30 to 40 on average hours of internet searches by adult male Americans per month. That's between 1 and 2 hours a day. Gaming was off the charts. In 2009, and it's increased since then, the average teenager was playing 13 hours of video games per week. Now, all those hours in front of a tube were replacing the playtime. And that's significant. In addition to that, the final one, number 4, is we're terrible examples to our children. We are in too much of a rush. We are eating poorly, we're eating fast food, we're relaxing in front of the television at the end of the day. We also are relying on technology instead of play, and we're not balancing our lives. My wife has a stitchery in our house as we've raised 2 children and now a couple of grandchildren that says, your children are watching. What you do speaks louder than anything you say. We were not doing the right thing. So, in typical Army fashion, I said, we've got to address these issues with our new recruits. And we changed several things. We began something we called the Soldier Athlete Initiative. Because you can't just say to a bunch of 18-year-olds, hey, we're going to get you all in shape and stop feeding you cheeseburgers. You have to give kind of a sexy title to it. So we called it the Soldier Athlete Initiative. If you're going to perform on the battlefield, you've got to train like a champion. And what we did was we completely changed, it's a three-legged stool, we completely changed the way we were training to compensate for things that were not going on in grade school and high school. We assigned physical therapists and athletic trainers to every organization because we wanted to prevent the injuries and treat them before they turned into those $100,000 bone stress fractures. We wanted to fix them as they became visible. And then the third thing, and probably the most important, was we changed the way we feed food in the mess hall, the dining facility. We called it fueling the soldier. You can't just say, hey, have a salad. We instead say, you got to advertise with soldiers. So we said, hey, we're going to fuel you for maximum performance. This is what this is what sports teams are doing. This is what NFL, Major League Baseball, they know they've got to eat right in order to perform at their maximum. Okay, I'm not going to dwell. We saw within the first year, we saw some unbelievably strong statistics that shows this was working. Reduction in injuries. We saved about $30 million the first year just in treatment of injury. $30 million in the Army, okay, just on injury prevention. And we began to see weight loss and improved, we reduced the number of overweight soldiers we had in the Army. We still have a way to go. We've advanced this fueling the soldier to fueling the teams, and in fact, we've redirected to the Department of Defense schools for our young people, and we're calling it fueling the future. What's interesting, so we fixed it, or we're on the way to fix it. But what's interesting about this is your Army, combined with your Navy, your Marine Corps, your Air Force, and your Coast Guard, makes up less than 1% of the American population. So my concern is what's going on with the other 99%. And this gets me back to my issue of this being national security. What I'll suggest you, I'm going to show you one area, and that's just levels of obesity. This was a chart that represents the number of states in the Union that were below 20% obesity rates on average from a child of 14 to 19 years old. This was in 1985. Watch what happened. As you can see, 2009 is significantly worse. The predictions for 2030 are these. You can see the number of states that have greater than 65% children obese. This is not overweight, this is obese. Now the related issues, as I told you, the issue with our injury rates and how much we were paying to fix people is significant. We spend, estimated, the Department of Health and Education both determine that we spend on average today between $150 to $200 billion per year treating the results of childhood obesity. We're seeing an increase in diabetes. We estimate that we'll have a 40% cardiovascular disease rate by the year 2030. This is significant. This is a health cost, a healthcare issue, an economic issue, a readiness issue for me because I'm seeing my pool of recruits based on this. I can't pull them in order to fix it. And it's just a competition issue. There's other studies that show what obesity and lack of activity do to young people. So I believe this is certainly a national security. There are several organizations that are attempting to approach it. You know, you may have heard of Mayor Bloomberg in New York, who has banned all sugary drinks above the 16 ounces in schools and public restaurants in New York City, and he took a lot of heat for that. Nike, Blue Cross Blue Shield, and Subway are all using overweight actors in their ad to pattern behavior and perhaps to turn this thing around. Nickelodeon, in last year's Worldwide Day of Play, decided to put their screens black as opposed to showing programming in order to get children outside to play. And of course, our First Lady, over the last several years, has been attempting to do Let's Move and to counter obesity. This concerns me. This concerns me greatly. Again, as I said, my name is Hertling. I am a soldier. I've been a soldier for 38 years. This is not something the Army can fix. This is not something you could put a yellow ribbon on and say, let somebody else take care of it. This is not something that we can rely on governments or organizations to do. Be fearless in terms of writing your school. Be fearless in trying to get nutrition back in restaurants. Be fearless in balancing your lives and getting out to exercise. Be fearless in modeling your behavior for young people. That will prevent a whole lot of Charlies in the future. Thank you very much.